is that regardless of whose side of the story you believe, the Air Force, the UFO research community, everybody agrees that some sort of object or device came down and was recovered. Now, the big question is, what's being covered up? But do you still get a lot of interest? I mean, do people still come out here and want to know what happened?
There's still a little interest. People still come.
Nick Redfern is just one of many who have investigated the most famous UFO case of them all.
So, Eddie, we're pretty much at the crash site right now. Can you kind of explain? I think one of the main reasons why people are so interested in and fascinated by UFOs is primarily because there's always a yearning for people to look for mysteries. You know, people love mysteries, whether it's UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, ghosts. People love a real-life mystery. And I think when, as I do believe with UFOs, there is a genuine mystery, that makes it even more intriguing.
No physical proof that a flying saucer came down in New Mexico has ever been produced. But the rumors that one did began a modern mythology.
So, Eddie, this is really where all the evidence was brought. What happened was that when flying saucer sightings began in '47, it was something totally new. Never been seen before, so people were fascinated by it.
The Roswell UFO incident set the scene for an incredible explosion in sightings across America. Over the next 50 years, UFOs grew into a global phenomenon. And now, the reason why is about to emerge. The late 1940s marks the start of America's fascination with UFOs. An obsession that coincided with its Cold War with the Soviet Union. It was a period when America started seeing a lot more unidentified flying objects.
The biggest trauma for post-war America in the 50s was the appearance of Sputnik in the sky. Once you get a space race starting, you begin to get this huge rash of UFO technologies being sighted.
The atomic age and the space race fed an increasingly popular sci-fi genre. And soon America was awash with B-movies featuring UFOs and invaders from outer space.
With films like Earth versus the Flying Saucers or The Day the Earth Stood Still, you begin to get an absolutely clear interrelationship between the kind of sightings that you get in the real world and the B-movie flying saucers of the 1950s.
In the 50s, this popular culture became reality. UFO sightings were on the rise. And the US military refused to acknowledge that they were responsible.
The recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
But that's not true.
Back in the 1950s, the Air Force, there's no doubt, was working on projects to try and build circular-shaped aircraft. One of these was known as the Avro car. You know, it looked pretty cool, like this silver, shiny, flying saucer.
At the height of the Cold War, both the Soviets and Americans were building experimental machines they hoped could win global supremacy. America's Avro car was one such experiment.
It's a very sexy-looking machine with a bubble dome. Never went higher than a couple of feet off the ground, despite having about 3,000 horsepower.
The Avro car inspired Paul Moller, an engineer, to build his own version of a flying saucer.
I do think it invokes the image of that little Jetson type of machine that we saw in the 60s that had the bubble dome and that freedom to move around in the future the way they did. That was very big in America, and I think it drives the interest of people to do it. Well, putting this canopy down really puts you into a very comfortable world.
Dr. Paul Mahler flying the M200X.
Paul Moller is one of only a handful of people who can claim to have flown a real flying saucer.
The OMC rotary engines developing.
It's truly a magic carpet sensation. When you're in a helicopter, there's a lot of vibration, number one. And number two, you have the sense you're being lifted from above. This machine here is absolutely no vibration. The rotary engine is like a sewing machine engine. The power comes from below you. And it's a totally different sensation, not supported by anything that you sense. It's really amazing. It's absolutely magic carpet sensation.
But in a time before widespread use of computer-assisted stabilization, these cumbersome craft carried considerable risk.
Start up! The problem on Earth is the aerodynamics. The air flowing around the vehicle generates a lift configuration, which is destabilizing. Now, you can put a big tail on it, of course, and that'll make it aerodynamically stable, but what is that? It's kind of a funny machine, round machine with a big fat tail on it. Doesn't make sense. So, artificial stabilization. When you're not dealing with the atmosphere, when you're outside of the atmosphere, of course, round is the perfect shape. Structurally, it does everything you want. It has all the right things. We just got to get rid of the atmosphere.
From an engineering point of view, America's attempts to build a fully operational flying saucer in the 1950s and 60s failed. The project's success was in its propaganda value. America's UFOs were a weapon of sorts.
I think one of the bigger issues relative to UFOs is the realization on the part of the military that, hey, you know, this is a phenomenon we can actually use to our advantage. If you imagine at the height of the Cold War, you subtly release information to the Kremlin that, hey, we've got a crash flying saucer, and we've actually begun to understand how and why it flies. That could actually spook the enemy.
America's UFOs were propaganda tools. Never a serious military threat, their primary purpose was to mislead foreign intelligence.
It acts as a good cover. The deep military projects to build highly advanced aircraft and platforms gets buried amongst a huge mass of stories of back engineering and super secret X-Files type conspiracies. And while we're all running around following them, the real military secrets gets hidden.
We now know that rumors which claimed the US was developing its own UFOs were intended to hide something else. But what? Maybe the Las Vegas UFO hunters can help find the answer. They've recorded an unidentified flying object on their equipment. Now they need to discover what it is.
Yeah, it's freaking out.
Peter Merlin knows a lot about what goes on in the sky over the desert. He says that evidence of UFOs in the sky can often be found on the ground.
One of the things people see around Area 51 are strange configurations of lights in the sky, glowing golden orbs, things like that. A lot of the time they're seeing these things. This is an Air Force anti-infrared flare. It provides a heat source to decoy heat-seeking missiles. And they look very strange to people on the ground because they seem to hang in the air or move in strange ways with the air currents while glowing and sputtering. The deserts are littered with thousands of these things. These account for a lot of the unusual light sightings in the night sky over Nevada.
But Las Vegas's finest don't buy that explanation of what they've seen. They think it doesn't fit.
It moved. That light moved.
It's blinking right there.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, it's on and just faded out. You know, there's a lot of military aircraft up there right now. They're doing the exercises and they're dropping flares.
But don't flares fall down? That one did look like it fell, but it was, flares float down. That's the nature of flares, is so it illuminates an area. They float like this. That shot down to the ground at like light speed.
I have no idea what that was.
at it again.
Look at that light, how it moves.
It's coming back. I'm gonna rewind it right here. It's right here. I am freaking out. Nothing moves like that.
That's strange.
So it's sort of half imagination. What the hell was that? Was that a bomb?
Probably.
You sure?
Yes, I think they're targeting your car, your vehicle.
That's not funny, dude.
The experienced UFO hunters are stumped. They've spotted an unidentified flying object over Area 51. But people like John Lear aren't surprised by sightings like these. They maintain there's a simple explanation.
There is nothing that we have developed that hasn't been influenced by ET. They've given us everything. From Roswell, we developed such things as transistors, fiber optics, and things like that.
Have the UFO hunters seen one of the reversed engineered UFOs Bob Lazar talked about in the late 1980s? In the Spring Mountains, 65 kilometers west of Vegas, Peter Merlin's on a mission to find out.
We're looking for the remains of a top-secret project capable of flying at speeds of over 2,000 miles per hour and up to 90,000 feet altitude. It was a CIA project tested at Area 51.
The question is, was this project based around UFO technology?
They looked like craft from other worlds, so one could be forgiven for thinking, wow, that's a UFO. Because if you've never seen something like that, then it most definitely is an unidentified flying object.
Now there's a chance to discover the truth. In 1967, one of these ultra-secret prototypes crashed here in the Spring Mountains.
Conventional wisdom would be that these sites would be completely cleaned up. I've talked to people who worked on the cleanup crews, and almost universally, they told me, don't even bother looking because the government cleaned up every trace. But when I go to these sites, I find that there's always something left. That is a pretty decent-sized piece of titanium. Yeah, there's a little bit of black paint on the outer surface. The airplane was painted black. This is part of a radar-absorbent structure, so this would have been one of the most secret components of the airplane. So it seems like it would be surprising to find pieces of it out here after they cleaned it up, but yet the desert is littered with it.
Peter Merlin has found pieces of the most sensitive military secret of the 20th century. It's not alien, but to the Soviets at the height of the Cold War, it might well have been. It's a technology so advanced that they never saw it coming, literally. America's stealth aircraft, introduced in the 1980s, changed the rules of aerial warfare. Exotic in looks and performance, these ultra-modern aircraft caused a flood of UFO reports over the Nevada desert. But stealth aircraft can't possibly be responsible for all UFO sightings worldwide. What strange craft triggered the others? Now, with modern technology, it may be possible to figure out what they are and where they come from. In today's world of high-tech gadgetry, machines that perform the simplest of functions can often be mistaken for